Hey, what's up, everyone? I offered, and I know Big Papa Fascist does a lot of immigration, but I offered immigration or healthcare. But Big Papa Fascist frankly, he said, Econoboi, I'm far too scared to debate you on healthcare, and so we decided to go with immigration instead. And of course, I obliged because this is his platform.
We'll go with that. Andrew's fine, by the way. Um, anyway, if you have issues with my the way that I view immigration, you want to go ahead and open. Let me know what your issues are, or maybe what your standpoint is on it.
Yeah, sure. So, essentially, my view is that immigration is really good for the economy broadly. Of course, there are nuances in that statement. I think that the Cato Institute, for instance, I think gets cited a lot when it comes to immigration and their sort of analysis under an economic framework, just to have essentially totally open borders. And the argument is that the market sorts people better than the government can. And I think to a certain extent, that argument has some merit, but I think there would be sort of systemic problems with totally open borders. But I think that with a controlled and efficient immigration scheme, you can essentially capture the gains of immigration and mitigate any sort of localized losses. And broadly, I think immigration is a net benefit to society because generally, when the economy grows larger, everyone's wealthier, everyone sort of has a increase in sort of standard of living and material condition. The two components of long-term economic growth, or the three components, are.
You cut out there, man.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. Well, just to finish up, I was going to say that the three components of long-term.
Yeah, three components. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the three components of long-term economic growth are technology to sort of expand the boundaries of your economy, capital, of course, the machines and tools we might use to do our work, and of course, us, the labor. And in a world with decreasing fertility rates, people having less children, it's really important for developing economies or developed economies to have, not necessarily loose, but have schemes and organizations that are open to immigration and allowing them in under permanent residency and citizenship.
Okay, gotcha. So let me ask you a couple of questions first. It sounds like, from your standpoint, immigration has more to do with economics than it does with anything else.
I think that you can certainly have a moral. I think I'm echoing a little bit, but you can certainly have a little bit. You can certainly have a moral argument for immigration too. Obviously, when someone's fleeing a war-torn or sort of poverty-stricken area to go to a wealthier, more stable country, certainly there's a moral argument as well.
Primary, like your primary motivation behind having mass migration is economic.
Sure, but it depends on how you define mass migration. But I think generally, yes, immigration is.
Well, wouldn't you consider 1 million people per year to be mass migration?
I wouldn't consider an absolute number ever to necessarily be mass migration. It depends on how your society is able to assimilate these people and sort of the strains that a certain amount of immigration might have on a society. Like 1 million immigrants a year doesn't appear to have put unsustainable strain on American institutions and society. And so it seems like that isn't.
What are you talking about? Of course it has. This
Well,
is all
explain
very,
how.
by the way, this is all very vague, right? So if I go, what's the number for mass migration? Well, it's like it's all very vague, man. So
Well,
first, let's get our terms right. What is mass migration to you?
So mass migration to me is relative to the population. So for instance, if like 100,000 people in a single room, that would be like a massive amount of people. But 100,000 people immigrating to, say, the United States, that's not exactly like a crazy amount of people. There's 330 million people in the country, and it seems
But there
like
was only 250 million in 1990.
Right, exactly. I mean, but that
So
kind of
mass
proves my
migration
point.
has added a massive portion to the population demographic. But how would you not consider, or what would you consider in 300 million people? What is mass migration? How many people are we talking? If it's not 1 million, what is it?
Yeah. So, for instance, in one of the classic studies that people cite in regards of immigration being bad for people is one of the Borjas studies,
Yeah.
and he looked at, I think, a specific city in or like a specific region of Florida, and I think it was within a couple weeks the population of this region increased by 7%, right? And so based on sort of the time scale and the actual magnitude of immigration relative to the population, that's when we can sort of start talking about like an unsustainable and incredibly mass amount of migration
So
that.
what's the number, man?
Well, sure. So based on those numbers, that would be like 20 or 25 million people immigrating to the U.S. within the span of only several weeks, right? That would be sort of the scale that I'm talking about.
Okay, so how many per year would be too many?
Per year, I mean,
Yeah.
well, this is over the course of several weeks, so I mean, I would say, you know, in the high tens of millions or low hundreds of millions. I mean, we would be talking about like a truly crazy level of immigration
So
to
mass migration to you is like 100 million people a year.
for the United States. Yeah, I mean, the United States has shown in to a certain extent a unique ability to absorb immigrants and assimilate them. The answer might be different for European countries with more sort of static welfare systems, but the U.S. seems to do pretty well when it comes to assimilating immigrants. So,
Okay,
we'd
cool.
have to have quite a lot of immigrants in quite a short period of time for me
Okay,
to consider
so
it to be a
I think
problem.
I think I got your terms down. I just wanted to make sure that I could get some kind of specifics here to work with. So let's back
Yeah.
up. So there's two different types of immigration that our immigration policy in the United States needs to be tailored towards, right? They're both intertwined. The first is illegal immigration. The first is legal immigration. My assumption with the pro-immigration status that you have, considering mass migration to be like 100 million people a year, which I think is fucking absurd, but we'll just let you have it. I'm guessing that for illegal immigration, the policy prescription that you would want is make them all legal, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that I'm not sure how the Reagan amnesty worked logistically, but I mean, you could obviously give these people permanent residencies or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight to citizenship.
Okay, but in some way legalize them.
Legitimizing them, yeah, giving them official documents and allowing them to sort of live free
So
from
once
the fear of
again, we're
deportation.
back to kind of this progressive mentality of we hate illegal immigration so much that we're just going to legalize all legal immigrants.
Well, I think it's not necessarily quite so stark, right? So, for instance, you can have different reasons for not liking illegal immigrants or illegal immigration. So, like a right wing reason for hating illegal immigration might be that they're not following the law. They're not they didn't they skipped in line, or like whatever the typical talking
Why would
points
that
might
not
be.
be a left wing position? That's bizarre.
Well, I'm not here like representing the left wing necessarily. I'm just trying to present sort of a balanced view, right? So my reasons for not necessarily liking the illegal immigration is that it's better for society when people can relatively quickly integrate. And it seems like if your goal is to sustainably integrate people into society, especially people that have already been here and been productive members of society for several years or even decades, that giving them official documentation, giving them residency would be the quickest and most expeditious way to do that.
I see. So all of these things that you're talking about are very vague generalizations, right? You
Well,
vaguely say,
I
look,
gave several sort of policies to
if these
standpoint.
people are here and they're already living productive lives and everything's just going smoothly, I don't see any big problem with giving them. And I think that that's a red herring. So let's talk about this in real time. Illegal immigrants bring over hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of dangerous drugs into the United States. Would you say that that's true or false?
I'd have to see the numbers on it, but nobody's in favor of illegal drugs
Okay,
that I
gotcha.
know of.
And then there's also a human trafficking issue that goes across the border that comes with illegal immigration. Crime syndicates often use illegal immigrants to do their dirty work, all of this type of thing. On top of that, they're breaking the nation's laws and they're skipping in line, which is immoral. There's other people all over the world who are waiting their turn in line. And then if you make an illegal immigrant a legal immigrant, their families get preferential treatment for coming over first. I don't see this as either as a moral system or a sustainable system at all. Why is it that you think it would be better for us to just go ahead and legalize all illegal immigrants who are here, who've already broken the law and living under stolen Social Security numbers, dead people's Social Security numbers, ripping off our tax system, rather than just massively deporting them back to their origin nations for breaking the law and then actually funding border security that works?
Yeah, so I'm not going to argue against having like a robust security checkpoint system for the border. You mentioned bringing over, people in regard to human trafficking or bringing over illegal drugs. There's nothing wrong with having, robust security checkpoints and sort of security regarding the border.
You know how
All
big the
that I'm,
border is, right?
not to be vague, but it's pretty big.
Yeah,
you
it's pretty big, right?
um,
So the thing is that just having a couple of security checkpoints on main roads isn't going to do it. You have to massively fund actual border security if you want to get these problems under control.
Well, I mean, I think we've got something. We don't have a couple security checkpoints. We have like 10, 20,000 border security guards that work for ICE. And that's not to mention that it's not just ICE that actually helps to patrol and manage the border crossings of the southern border. I mean, I think that, the idea that the U.S. doesn't have at least a relatively well-funded immigration system, you might argue about scale or whatever, but I think we have a fairly decently enough funded immigration system. I would argue that there should be more funding for immigration courts so that there's not as much backlog and that you can. That's something that conservatives and liberals should both want for different reasons. But
You
for
think
some
that
reason,
funding immigration courts is going to suddenly get you lots more immigration judges who are well trained, have gone through law school, have done many years of prep work that's required to become a judge? That's not going. That's
um,
going to take a long period of time to do, man.
well, for sure. But I mean, typically the advantage of government investment is that you can think long term. It's not all necessarily profit driven. You can make
Great.
long term investments in systems and institutions, right?
This is awesome. So now we're getting somewhere. So if we're thinking about long-term investments, and you're looking at this from an economic standpoint, do you recognize that the birth rates in the South American nations are also decreasing?
Yeah, I think that pretty much across the entire world. I
With
shouldn't
the
say birth
exception of
rates.
Africa, the birth rates are drastically dropping.
Honestly, I believe I read that even in Africa, birth rates are dropping, but it
Some
depends
parts.
on, sure, maybe some parts. That's true. Maybe like Northern Africa or something like that. But
Yeah, actually, it is. It's Northern Africa mostly. So
yeah, because
the
it's
Arab
more
nations,
developed countries.
yeah,
Yeah.
Arab nations' birth rates are dropping. The Western nations' birth rates are dropping. South America's birth rates are dropping. So your plan of bringing in an unfettered amount of immigrants via mass migration in order to replace the domestic population is putting a band-aid on a gunshot wound. What happens when you no longer have a sustainable birth rate system from countries that are just right next door that you've been bleeding dry for their people, and their birth rates have become stagnant now too? How do you
Yeah.
plan
So
on
no.
addressing that?
Yeah, to be fair, no one's talking about necessarily unfettered immigration. I mean, I think I said even in the opening statement that I'm not for completely open borders or anything like that. It's just a matter of controlling immigration flows to such an extent that you've got the population. Oh, oops. You've got the population growth that you need, and you can absorb and assimilate these people,
Okay.
quickly enough, right?
Even with the
That's all I'm saying.
clarification, I don't think that it's that my question is invalidated in any way. So, if
No,
you,
I was just
yeah,
no, I was just responding to I think the poor framing of my argument, not for unfettered immigration, to respond directly to your question of, well, how is it necessarily sustainable if birth rates across the world are for the most part dropping, or at least they're going to be dropping at some point as countries develop? The answer is that twofold. One is that capital becomes more efficient over time, and so capital is probably going to replace, to a certain extent, a lot of the burden of labor that we have currently.
automation.
But
So you're saying automation is the answer? That's
no, not necessarily automation, but just capital efficiency can become a lot better over time. But automation plays certainly a component. Capital's become incredibly, exponentially more efficient over the last 40 years, and so I'm not sure necessarily
okay.
why that
Well,
trend.
define what you mean by capital in relation to immigrant labor. What do you mean by capital?
Right. So, for instance, like I wouldn't call like Microsoft Excel is not automation. You have to still learn how to do Excel and do a lot of manual things in Excel, but it makes workers a lot more efficient because it does a lot of stuff more efficiently than like a bookkeeper could do on a pen and paper, right? So that's an example of a non-automated way that capital can increase the efficiency of an economy. But like I said, automation plays a role. The second component that I was going to mention is that even in a world where birth rates are falling to the point that like every this isn't going to happen for 200 years, but let's
No,
just say
that's not
every
true.
single
It's going to happen within 45 years.
what's going to happen within 45 years
That most
specifically.
countries are going to be under replacement levels.
Yeah, sure. Most countries, right? But what I'm saying, though, is that there's going to be countries with a surplus of births that are going to have immigrants going abroad. These are typically underdeveloped countries, and typically in underdeveloped countries, there's going to be a bend towards them immigrating towards more highly developed countries because, they want more access of opportunity, basically, right? And so I don't see this as becoming a problem for certainly not in our lifetimes, certainly not in our children's lifetimes,
Yeah, but
maybe
who
not even in our
cares? Who
grandkids'
cares if it's
lifetimes.
not even in our children's lifetimes, right? Even
Right.
though
So that
I greatly disagree with that sentiment that it will be within our children's lifetimes, and it looks like all of the trends are moving in that direction, whether you like to think so or not. This is all very vague, right? So what you're saying to me essentially is, look, BPF, here's the thing. Even if we fall below our birth rate threshold all across the world, there's still likely going to be underdeveloped countries that we can just still draw whatever human capital that we need to bring into the United States. You couldn't name for me what those countries are. You have no clue. You're just kind of generally and vaguely saying, I think that one will be available, so everything's fine.
Well, I don't think it's unreasonably vague to say that there
It's
will no.
unreasonably vague. Where are they going to come from, man? We draw mostly from South America right now. When that pool is dried up, where do you want to start pulling them from?
Sure. So, two things. One is that, again, I think there will be countries with a net birth rate, but even if you don't accept that premise, there will still be
Which
countries that are.
ones then? Tell me which ones are going to have the net birth rate.
I don't even understand how that's material. I'm just making
It's
like a
material
reasonable
because
assumption.
you're making the affirmative claim that people are just always going to be available as human capital to bring in here, and I'm saying that that's not true. So if you claim that it is, tell me where they're going to be coming from when the population threshold reduces to the point we can't draw from them from the south anymore. Even if that takes 55 years, who gives a shit? That's a drop in the
Yeah.
bucket.
So that's the second answer to the question, right? Which is where are they going to come from, even in a world where birth rates have fallen below replacement in every single country in the world, right? So they're still going to come from these underdeveloped countries, right? The fact is that the
Where?
United
Which
States.
ones? You keep saying that these underdeveloped. Which underdeveloped countries do you think that they're going to be coming from?
Oh, probably from the same countries they're coming from now, mostly and
I just
materially,
told you
right? They're
that
going
they're
to be
mostly
coming.
coming from South America, and their
Right. They're most.
birth rates are getting below replacement levels as well. One
Right,
third
but
of
Andrew, this.
Guatemala is already here in the United States. You're going to empty out
Yeah.
the other 2/3 of it. That's great. Now we're at, let's say, 700 million people domestically in the United States, and suddenly the birth rate starts to tick off. You have mass die-outs. This is how this works in real time. This is what the UN is predicting is going to happen, in fact. I want to know where the fuck you plan on drawing these people from.
Well, no, because again, you're assuming that when a person, I'm not. Well, I guess it's hard to say what you're assuming here. So, what I'm trying to say is that
I'm not
to
assuming
me,
anything.
in a
I'm giving
hundred.
you trends, real time trends. Here's the real time trend. Since 1800, the birth rate in the United States has dropped like a fucking rock, with the exception of the 50s to 60s. Globally, since 1960, it's been dropping like a rock all over the world. The only Western nation that you would consider a Western nation that even has sustainable birth rates as we speak is Israel. No other one. That's it.
Yeah.
This
Uh,
same trend is happening in South America, where Mexico's at 2.10. You need to be at least 3, or at least close to 3. And that's continuing to drop every year as well. Most of our immigration comes from south of the border. So when you say these vagaries, like I'm sure that there's just absolutely going to be some underdeveloped country somewhere that we can just continue to draw a pool of human capital from, I want to know where the fuck that is, right? That
well, you're
seems
assuming,
reasonable to me.
but well, it's reasonable if you're only looking at one part of the equation, right? So the second part of the equation that I keep trying to get to is the idea that I'm probably not expecting that the country that places come from, or the country that immigrants come from, is going to change incredibly materially, right? So in 100 years, you're probably still going to see most of the immigrants from America being from south of the border, right? Being from South Asia, being from China, right? That's probably not going to change, right? These birth rates in these countries might change, right? They might go negative, or not negative, but they might go, below replacement or whatever. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to still see a net inflow of people across the border or across borders, and then we're going to see the population rise, right?
This is
So you're
all
still.
vague prediction. What are you basing any of this on?
I mean, it's not necessarily vague prediction. It's
Yes,
it's
it
what's
is.
been
It's totally
happening.
vague. You're saying
No,
well,
it's not.
what's
It's
probably going to happen is probably this, probably based on blah. I'm giving you
well,
what's happening in real time right this
well, no.
second.
So what you're saying is it's probably the case that the trend in declining fertility rate is going to continue. Now, what I'm saying is that it's probably the case that the trend in immigration is going to continue, in the sense that people from underdeveloped countries are going to continue to have the motivation to immigrate to highly developed countries. And so it wouldn't be surprising to me if that trend continued, where the US continues to have a large pool of immigration, a large pool of immigrants to supplement the population growth of the country. It's one of the things that makes our economy a lot stronger than the rest of
I
Europe.
get the argument. I just heard you repeat the same argument you just made. Where? You think they're going to still be coming from South America even when the birth rate in South America is below replication levels? This is what you're telling me.
So I can say it a third time. The third time is that I do not expect that immigration flows are going to probably materially change depending on the country. It'll probably still be the case based on the trend that's always existed, that immigrants in America are probably mostly going to be from south of the border and basically South Asia and East Asia.
That trend has not always existed from south of the border. What the hell are you talking about? We had trends of immigration that came from Europe. We had trends of immigration that came from China. We've had trends of immigration that were not coming from Mexico or south of the border at all for large chunks of our history. So I don't even know where you're getting this from.
I mean, I think for the last several decades, it's been the case that at least a plurality of immigrants have come from south of the border. But again, that's somewhat immaterial to what I'm saying. I'm just saying that
it's not immaterial to what you're saying, because you're painting this picture out that that business as usual is just going to be able to be sustained even when we don't have the human capital to sustain it. And then you just kind of vaguely say that you think that the trends will just continue as is. From my perspective, what you're saying to me is we're going to be able to continue to draw as many oranges as we want from all of the orange trees that are outside, even if they're producing half the amount of oranges that they were before. That's literally what it sounds like to me.
Well, sure, but if you have an orange orchard that's producing half of the amount of oranges per tree, but then you ship in twice as many orange trees that are producing half as many, oranges, you're still going to have like a net production of oranges based on that orchard at the end of the year. That's what I'm saying. Now, my question to you
that's wrong. That's wrong. It doesn't even fucking make sense. What you're saying is, well, what we'll do is we'll just add more orange trees. I'm telling you, there's no more orange trees to fucking add. I don't understand why you're not getting this.
Do you think that do you think that because the birth rates in South America are going to eventually become below replacement, do you think that will all of a sudden cause people to stop wanting to immigrate to the United States?
It can, yeah.
Why?
Because the more people that you have, the more of a domestic pool you have to draw from for people who want to immigrate out of a nation. That should be fucking obvious to everybody.
So do you think people are immigrating from these countries because... that's a good question. Why do you think these people are immigrating from these countries to the United States?
For a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's an economic-based reason. Sometimes it's a refugee-based reason. Sometimes it's just because they want to shift in their wage. There's a lot of different reasons.
Okay, so
people would want to immigrate, not just to the United States, not just to Canada, not just to Europe. There's a lot of different reasons that people would want to do that in a legal fashion.
So all three of the reasons that you just mentioned, obviously you mentioned there's more, but let's just go with those three. Mm-hmm. Economic opportunity, shift in wages, and refugee status. Now, do you expect that because of the decline in fertility and birth rates, that these reasons would not continue to persist, especially in low-income countries?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that who cares? Even if the pool becomes so low that you can't replace the human capital, you want this for the expansion of human capital. In your worldview, more immigrants, more gooder, because more money, right? This is the framework that you use. If you have less people to draw from, you're going to have less immigrants coming in no matter what. If this is the case, then your whole framework for why you want immigration to begin with, which is for more money, goes right out the fucking window, because you can no longer get the amount in that you need in order to sustain your pro-growth framework.
Well, I also said there's a moral component as well. I just focused on the economic one here, right? Now, the point that I'm trying to get at is that there's no reason necessarily to expect there wouldn't be a net inflow of immigrants. I mentioned the first part, which you haven't necessarily responded to, the idea that capital becomes more efficient and is going to displace or make more efficient labor across time,
It can.
probably leads
Yeah, it can.
right. And so necessarily there
But
would
you're
probably
taking a
be
hell of a gamble assuming that it's going to keep up with the decline in birth rates. I'm skeptical of that.
well, sure,
And
but
there's no evidence that you can provide that it will.
well, of course, I can't predict the future of technological advancement.
But
I
we
can
can
only assume.
predict the future of what's going to happen in the birthing trends.
Well, right, but by that logic, we would still be advantaged by allowing immigrants in because we do need labor, especially in the scenario where our birth rates are declining.
Okay, that's nice. Even if what you're saying is true, and you would still be advantaged by letting immigrants in, if your whole framework is you want more immigrants because you want more money, and we start beginning to have economic contraction because we can't get enough immigrants in because the birth rate's too fucking low, then what's the point? You've already begun economic contraction. The very thing that you think makes this country so appealing for immigrants to come in the first place and work, which is you have an expanded economy and everybody's making lots of money, begins to contract. This makes this place a lot less appealing for immigrants to come to, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. I think what you're describing over time is a leveling off of the inequality between nations, which I
Not
wouldn't
leveling
really.
off. No, it's not a leveling off. What I'm describing is a global catastrophe, and it's happening right in front of your eyes. It's not just a leveling off. You do realize that if you get below replacement rates to a certain threshold, that it's almost impossible to recover, right?
Well, if you don't allow immigrants in, I would agree, right? We look at Japan, of course, they seem to have quite a problem with that. One of the reasons that China's economy has been lagging over the course of the last 5 years, I should say, is because of their low birth rates and lack of immigration. All that I'm really advocating for is we know that immigration fills pools of labor where fertility rates don't. And so what I'm advocating for is continuing that trend. You're saying, oh, it's unsustainable because in 50 or 100 years, birth rates across the world will be declining to that
No,
point.
I'm saying that they already are, and that you're going to start to see drastic effects from that within 45 years. So my solution is far better. My solution is far better than yours. What I advocate for, instead of just replacing the domestic population endlessly with immigrants, who we may not even be able to pull enough from in the next 50 or 60 years to continue with your insane plan of existential, never-ending GDP growth, that instead we pull those resources in order to incentivize the domestic population to breed. Then we have an integrated workforce that's already here, that's ever expanding. You don't have cultural cohesion issues. You don't have to throw trillions of dollars at integrating people. Why is that a worse plan?
Well, I would have a lot of problems with many of the, sort of presumptions that you made there. But I would say that in general, depending on the incentive, I'm not sure most people would have a problem with incentivizing people to have children. For instance, people were broadly supportive of Joe Biden's child tax credit, which made it a lot easier to raise a family.
Cut out again.
Thus, if people
cut out again. Sorry, you were at the Joe Biden tax plan.
Yeah, basically, if people were hesitant to have children because of money, something like the child tax credit would be a way to incentivize that to happen, right? It seems like a lot of the reasons
you
why
don't
people
have
aren't having.
So you don't have any kids, do you?
Why do I have any? No, I don't presently
Yeah,
have any.
I knew you didn't have any kids. The second you said that a $3,300 tax credit was going to incentivize people to have children, that's insane.
Well, it's not insane because you're thinking in sort of absolute terms that wouldn't make any sense.
That's how I knew you had no kids. I knew you had no kids the second you said that, because you don't have the world experience to understand that $3,300 when it comes to a child's fucking nothing.
Well, if you obviously I never said that the total cost of raising a child was equal to the tax credit given by the Biden administration.
Then what the hell are we talking about? Just saying that you've given people an additional $1,000. He raised it from the $2,000 that Trump was giving them by $1,000. That's it. There should be a global fucking explosion of babies, everybody. Come on, man.
No, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not an honest reading of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that all else equal, having $250 to $300 a month extra in regard to having children, a per child tax credit, that helps people financially raise children. I assume you would agree with the idea.
It barely even helps cover with the cost of inflation due to Biden's policies. Give me a fucking break. It's not an offset. It's not helping anybody in any tangible way.
To the idea that $250 to $300 extra is better than nothing. So all I'm saying is, all else equal, the point of me bringing that up was that that is an example of how the state could inadvertently or directly incentivize people to have more children. Now, the point that I brought that up was because you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can incentivize the domestic population, oftentimes very difficultly, to have children, while also bringing immigrants in. The state seems across time to have had a hard time incentivizing the domestic population to have more children. It tends to fail, but we can
When
have
has the
those
state tried
conversations.
to do that?
Yeah, so across time, you often see
No, no, no. When has the
authoritarian.
United States ever done it?
When has the United States incentivized people to have children? I mean, I would
No, had
say
a
that the
massive
child.
had a birth rate plan at the governmental level in order to incentivize birth.
Oh, as far as I'm aware, there's never been like a war on poverty
And what
esque.
the hell are you talking about, man? You just
No,
making
what?
shit up based on old trends, have nothing to do with what's going on right now.
No,
Saying
I didn't.
saying
I didn't
hey,
make anything up.
saying these absurd shit like, hey, when the state always has trouble raising birth rates, and I go, okay, well, when has this state tried to raise birth rates? And you go, well, never. It's like, well, then how do you know they're going to have trouble with it, right? You don't know. You know what I
Well,
mean?
you men-
You're
you
just
you mentioned.
generalizing with vagaries again. You don't know
Well,
that.
you mentioned the United States. Obviously, there have been instances
Well,
where
what country are we talking about? Somalia?
Okay, that's fair. If you want to only talk about the United States as a way to get your empirics, that's fine. Obviously, if the US hasn't done something, therefore there's no empirics to look back towards. But what I would say, what you're not really responding to, is the idea that you can, in fact, incentivize your population to have children domestically
Yeah.
whilst also bringing in immigrants. There's
Yeah,
no reason we shouldn't necessarily do both.
here's my response to this. Why would we pull all of those resources towards immigration allocation programs? We only have X amount of resources to spend inside the continental United States. Instead of focusing on the domestic population, focus on replacing the domestic population with a foreign population. That seems fucking insane to me. It also is counterintuitive to the interest of the United States in many, many ways. The first way that is counterintuitive is with social cohesion. I'm not advocating that we don't have a multicultural society. We already have one right now. I'm advocating that the people who are already existing in this multicultural society be incentivized to breed at the maximum level so that we do not have to focus on foreign labor coming in, replacing our workforce, and creating cohesion issues. Our domestic population should be spurred on rather than hopefully focusing on the immigrant population until there's so few of them that you can't even replace the domestic population. You end up with economic contraction anyway. That seems very stupid and counterintuitive to me.
Well, what do you mean by domestic population? Because you're talking at this point about tens of millions of people who are U.S. citizens that I guess you would consider
Hundreds of
originally.
millions of people who are U.S. citizens. What do you mean?
No, I'm saying that a lot. I'd be curious as to how where do you draw the line? When does someone become a domestic citizen?
When they become United States citizens, according to the Constitution. That can be done a couple of different ways. You can be a naturalized citizen. You can be born in the United States. There's a couple of different constitutional criteria that's required to become a United States citizen.
Okay, so you're basically saying you're describing domestic population as anyone who's not fresh off the boat, like someone who's basically been here for maybe a generation.
People who already either are naturalized or have been born inside the United States, most of which are going to be born inside the United States. We know this because we know the immigrant number that's coming in right now. So most of the people who are here have been born here. And what I'm saying is that for social cohesion purposes, the best thing we can do for public happiness, public welfare, as well as domestic wages is to incentivize our own people to have lots and lots of children. If you're married, your happiness threshold goes up. If you have children, your happiness threshold goes up. If you're here and you're born here to a family that's already been here, you have less issues in life as well. Every status indicator is that it's better to be born inside the United States to a two-parent household, and that the prospects for you economically and socially greatly increase regardless of what your racial or ethnic background is. So why shouldn't we focus on doing that to maximize what probably somebody like you, I'm guessing you're probably like utilitarian based or something like this. I just kind of have this feeling.
Oh, you're asking? Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself
Yeah, I
relatively
kind of figured. Yeah,
utilitarian.
so maximum utility would be to do my program, not your program. This
Well, I
would
think
increase
maximum utility would be to do both.
GDP. Well, the thing is, though, is that you assume that we have endless resources, though yearly we go into debt and inflation is climbing. We do not have endless resources. We should not be expanding social programs to the point of absurdity when we can be incentivizing the domestic population. That makes more sense.
You're talking about social programs. You're talking about financial incentives and sort of regulatory incentives to
Actually, I'm not
give
talking
people.
about social programs. The plans that I would implement would be tax cuts, not social welfare.
Well, if you give someone a tax cut, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have more children. It
It
seems that
does if you
across.
make the criteria for the tax cut to have more children. Like, for instance, you have 3 children and you never pay income taxes again. That would be a
You
pretty
have
good deal, wouldn't it?
you have 4 children, and
Three.
and you
Let's
just
just say 3 children
oh,
and
I'm
never pay
sorry, three
income
children.
tax again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something like that would probably lead to more people being incentivized to have children, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that would be a net benefit for everyone in society. I mean, you're
Oh, yeah. Well,
talking
why
about.
would that be not a net benefit to people in society, but unfettered amounts of immigration would be more of a benefit? Explain
Well,
that.
because you're talking about really structurally defunding a substantial portion of the U.S. government. And hey, to be fair, maybe you as a more conservative individual would be fine with that. But I'm saying that
What? Whoa,
those
whoa,
same.
whoa, 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 whoa! Back up. What do you think that income taxes go to fund?
What do I think? They go to
Yeah.
fund the federal government.
What are your roads funded by?
What are the roads? I believe they're funded in combination with the gas tax and general
It's the
revenue.
gas tax, right? The gas tax, how states fund the roads. What about your schools?
All,
How are those?
also general revenue.
Yeah, okay, no, not in every state. It's not general revenue. That's
You
one.
you
But
think you
two,
think the federal government doesn't spend treasury money on building roads? What do you think
I
the
think that
semiconductor bill cost was?
some states have economic net output to the federal government, and some states do not have economic output to the federal government. So some take in more federal aid than they don't. So yes, there are some states that are self-sufficient just based on the gas tax for roads. It's absurd not to think so. Now
Every
that
single state in
I
this
did.
country takes federal money to build roads. I don't
Yes,
know
but
what you're
if that
talking about.
state is paying more to the federal government than they're getting back from the federal government, then they're a self-sustaining state, right?
Right, but that would still go against your point overall
No,
of
it
this
wouldn't
not
go
being a
against my
terrible
point
thing.
because if the federal government wasn't taking their fucking money, they wouldn't have to give it back to them.
Right, but then you're leaving a lot of states behind. Why shouldn't Mississippi have paved roads?
They would have paved roads. They might have to do something at the state level without getting a federal subsidy, right? The same thing goes for schools. Schools also operate off of property taxes, right? That's their primary base of income, right? The income tax, most of the income tax goes towards social benefits like Social Security, social welfare programs, things like this. Well, you wouldn't have to give people tons of social welfare if they didn't have to pay the fucking income tax to begin with.
Well, 90% of the money for Medicare and for Social Security comes from the payroll tax, not the income tax, right? So you're targeting something
It
completely
goes
different.
mostly to social benefits, income tax. By the way, show me that most of it goes from the payroll tax. Do you have something on that for me?
Yeah, I made a video on it. I can get you the source real quick. My only point would be that again, I'm not sure you've clearly demonstrated. Well, I suppose your point, and of course, interrupt me if I'm not representing your point, is that we spend so much money on immigrants and like basically immigration enforcement that we could rather we could do better by spending that money instead on these not social programs, but these programs that financially incentivize people to have children domestically.
Yes.
Okay,
That would be
so
far better and long term, far more sustainable.
right. So what I would say is that you are now speaking fairly vaguely. You have not demonstrated necessarily that this would even
Well, what
cause people to have
specifics
more
would I
children.
like? Would you like?
Well, according to your framework, I would need an example of the United States doing this in the past and having it work out because
Why would
we're
you
only
need
talking
what?
about the
What?
United
Wait,
States.
wait, wait. Why?
Well, I tried to reference other countries and you said we're only talking about the United States. That's fair enough. I'm just saying that's the example
Okay.
now that you'd have to
So it
present.
is true that I can't give you an example of them giving a specific birth rate incentive program, but what I can do is give you an example of when there was unintentional birth rate incentive programs, which would be the GI Bill post World War II, which led to the largest baby boom in United States history. Was there anything else you had for me?
Well, do you think that the baby boom in World War II was based on the actual GI Bill, or
It
was
was
it
based
based
on a
on?
combination of three factors, one of the most important of which was the GI Bill, but there was other ones as well. One of the big ones was that there was a huge amount of factory infrastructure that had been created for the war. Those factories were able to retool into other automated systems like vehicles, things like this. Almost everybody had high-paying jobs right away. There was other factors that went into it, but you can clearly see that there is a framework here for mass incentivization of birth rates. We had one, and it was called the baby boom post World War II. So yes, I can indicate this historic portion inside the United States in the last 100 years that has worked in order to incentivize birth rates in a massive way. So massive, in fact, it was the only time that the scales have really tipped up since the year 1800.
Yeah. So what I would say is that if we're
One
gonna,
second, I don't mean to cut you off, I don't mean to interrupt you either. But I did have this super chat. I just wanted to get to you real quick, if you don't mind. Is
yeah,
that
no worries.
after the birth rates fall all over, won't the demand for goods and services fall in line with the population decrease? I'll let you field that first, and then I'll take it if you want.
After the birth rates fall all over, won't the demand for goods and services fall in line with the population decrease? I suppose I'm confused with what they're saying. It seems like what they're saying, what
He's
they mean
like,
to
it's
say is,
scalable. He's saying it's scalable, right?
yeah,
So
it
like,
seems
there's
like
only
what,
going to be so many goods and services for the people who demand goods and services.
yeah, it seems like what they're saying is rather when the population falls, because again, like you can have falling birth rates and an increased population, so then your demand for goods would increase over time. And not necessarily. I mean, you see, if that were the case, then Japan wouldn't necessarily be having all these economic constrictions as a result of their population decreasing. There's a lot of structural problems with the Japanese economy because of their population decreasing, and it doesn't seem like you're able to replace that currently with just like automation or things like that. You need people. You need people to show up. That would be my answer to that question.
Well, it's not just that, but it's not scalable in the way that you think anyway, because you need X amount of human labor in order to sustain quality of life status that we enjoy in the West and that most of the world is beginning to enjoy now. Things like massive food exports, everybody being able to have access to clean food and water is a massive labor pool like you can't even believe. So I don't think it's scalable the way people think that it's scalable.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, I think in response to the example of the U.S. incentivizing birth rates inadvertently in World War II, I think it's wrong. I think that I'm looking at the
You mean it's
population.
wrong? It's not wrong.
Well, no, I'm not. Well, when I say wrong, I don't mean like morally wrong. I would say that your analysis is incomplete. Now, what I was going to add on to that was that looking at this from 1930 to 40, it appears that the birth rate in that decade actually fell quite a bit, and then from 40 to 50, it picked back up to regular pace, right? So I think that the proper analysis to that wouldn't be that the GI Bill caused a lot of people to have a bunch of children. Rather, it probably had a lot to do with the fact that a bunch of young men in you could say like prime kid having age were all off fighting a war for 4 to 5 years, and then when they came back, they were relatively eager at that point to have children because they'd all just been through like one of the worst wars in human history, right? So I think to me that's probably a more significant explainer for why the population increased after World War II rather than like the government
First of
implementing a
all,
GI Bill.
what year was World War II? Was it 1930?
Well, no, it was 41 was when the U.S.
Okay,
got involved, I
it
believe.
was not 1930. So I don't know why you're addressing 1930,
Well,
but
I didn't say 1930. I
you
said
did. You said
I said compared to 1930s birth rates, they fell precipitously by 1940, and
Mhm.
then they rose back to normal trends, not above trends, in 1950
And
after
now
World
tell
War
me
II.
something. In 1940, what year did you start to see the dip off in birth rates?
In 1940, what year? You're talking about a
In the
single year. What do you?
1940s, what year did the dip off begin?
Oh, I don't know. I'm looking at a census data. I don't have per year data. You tell
So
me.
I mean, because it wouldn't make sense that since we shipped over most of the young men of the United States to fight a war in the 40s, that nobody would be around having babies, right?
What do you
Like that
what
wouldn't
do you
make any sense, would it? That since we shipped off all of our young men to fight a war in 1941, 42, 43, 44, right? That just maybe since there was no young men around, that might have something to do with that massive dip in the 40s that you're
Yeah,
talking about, right?
that is exactly what I'm saying, right? What
Okay,
I'm
so then they
saying is
come
that
back. So what would have happened if we hadn't had the war? It still would have continued to drop, right?
so what I'm
According to the
saying,
trend.
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that because of World War II, it seems like the fact that we had a massive amount of young men in like the prime ages to have children off fighting a war and women working in the factories because of the, low amount of domestic labor at that point, relatively low, that we had to drop off in birth rates. Now, what you are claiming
What would the
is
trend
that,
have been if
well,
they had not
I have
gone
to
to
finish
war?
my point.
Okay.
So I'm answering the question, right? So what you're claiming is that the GI Bill caused this uptick in birth rates. What I'm saying is that the boys just came back, and that's why birth rates didn't go to some unbelievable amount past that. They went back to relatively normal trends, right? Now, you're saying what would have happened if they didn't go to war? Again, the trend of birth rates, very, relatively slowly declining over time, uh, probably would have continued to a certain extent.
Okay,
That's all
thank
I'm
you.
saying.
So
I
I
don't
don't
think,
even know
right?
what your point. Your point is moot. There was a massive baby boom in the late 40s, clear up till the 60s, man. So I don't even
Right.
know what the hell
So,
you're talking about. And
okay. So,
without those federal subsidized programs that all those young men had come back to, the trend would have just continued to stagnate downward, according to your own admission. I don't even understand what the hell you're talking about at this
so
point.
the trend did still continue to stagnate downward, right? In 1910, I'm
No, there
looking
was
at
a
it here.
boom. There was a boom, and
No,
then
no.
it went down. And do you know what caused that?
So I'm not saying that there was no effect of. I'm trying to say quite the opposite, actually, right? There was some effect of government policy on birth rates. I'm not saying there wasn't, right? All that I'm saying is that most of the increase in birth rate and population at the time was probably due to the men being gone for half a decade and then coming back rather than the GI Bill. If the GI Bill caused people to have more kids, the trend should have continued because the
It did
GI Bill
continue.
is
It
still
continued
around.
until the 60s. When did the war end, man?
The GI, what do you, okay, describe the GI Bill to me in your own
It was
words.
not just it was a combination of multiple factors, not just the GI Bill. That was one factor that I stated. But what the GI Bill did was it allowed for you to be able to get home loans, essentially subsidized by the federal government. This is what you would refer to as a government loan for a house, right? Uh, by the way, the GI Bill covers that to this day. If you do military service, you can easily obtain a house
Right.
as a veteran
As
due to
well as college education.
that type of program. One of the number one indicators for having a family is what? Having a house, right?
Right.
So of course it played into it, but not just that. It also paid for higher education. There was also a higher amount of factory jobs that were available because of the industrialization of the military war complex in the 1940s, which was easily retooled. An example of this would be right here in Saginaw, Michigan. They made M1 carbines. They had taken a small automotive plant, retooled it to make M1s for GIs all over the world. Okay, after the war, they didn't need to make M1 carbines anymore, right? So they could retool plants like that, furniture plants, things like this, very, very easily. So
Right. So
there was a
because
huge combination of factors that went into it, right, as far as economic incentives go. But I'm giving you that example in that year spat so I can show you that indeed you can incentivize birth rates, and it has successfully been done. Even if
right.
that
So
was
so
not the
in
primary incentive, we know how to do it.
right. So it seems like what you're saying is if you give people access to affordable education and the opportunity to buy a home, and I suppose a robust economy, that would increase the birth rate. Is that a reasonable summary of what you've just said?
Well, no, I'm saying that all of those indicators can play into obviously a family unit being able to expand. But what I'm saying is that you can directly use economic incentives clearly in order to incentivize birth rates. And there's a span in the last 100 years that I've indicated to you where that has been successfully done, even if
Right.
that was not the primary motivator. So the thing
So
is that if you were to take the income tax, for instance, and you were to completely cut it out of a person's life, okay, and then you could guarantee an FHA loan to that same person, which we can do right this second, as FHA loans are available to almost everybody, but you could limit the amount of credit that's necessary. People's wages would necessarily skyrocket if you eliminated the income tax. I think that the economic motivators would be there to see exactly the same such type of boom that you saw between the late 40s and the early 60s. Why wouldn't that be the case?
All right, so I'm going to ask you for a specific now because you've asked me for a specific. How much more money does a person need to have before they're incentivized to have more children? So,
It's
like,
not
what's a
just money.
dollar?
It's not just money. They need to have economic stability as well. So
Okay, sure.
you can a person can win the lottery. They call it the lottery curse. For example, you can have $2 million given to you. If you're terrible at managing money, you lose it all in the first year or two. Okay. If you are, though, to give people, you're always, you leftists are always talking about wage increases, especially for the lower class and the middle class. Best way that you can give the lower middle class and the upper middle class the most massive wage increase they've ever had, something to the tune of 40% of what their wage is right now, would be to cut out their income tax. And if you use the incentivization of 3 children, I think that you would find that we had a population explosion the likes of which you've never seen.
Right. So I think that my problem would be is that since the basically say the 1960s, the area we're talking about, household wages have gone up, what, 50, 60, 70%?
Barely even compensates for inflation. What a red herring.
Well, it's
what a
that's
fucking red herring.
absolutely
God,
not
come
true.
on, man.
That's
This is what you
no,
got?
you're spouting nonsense right now.
Okay.
Real median household income has increased precipitously since the 1940s and 50s and 60s. If you don't think that the average American I should say the median American household has significantly more income than in the 1940s and 50s, you are living in a fantasy land. That's not true. Now, the reason I point that out.
What about economic disparity between classes? How's that gone since the 60s?
So, in theory, we have become a more, well, I shouldn't say in theory, we have become a more unequal society. But if we're talking about what you're talking about, which isn't the relative amount of inequality causing people to have more kids, you're talking about real money, material condition. That has gone up precipitously for the average person, for the median person over time.
How
You're
much?
denying that fact. Well, I have the numbers here from
Okay, tell me what they are. And then I want you to offset it with inflation. Tell me what they were making as the median income then for the average person in the United States. Tell me what the buying power of the dollar was then, and then tell me what it is now, and we'll see if we can do some quick math and see where we get to.
Right. So real median household income has increased.
Can you link that to me, by the way? I'm sorry, in the private chat.
Yeah, sure. So real median household income has increased from 53,000 to, if we use 2020, hold on, where did I put the chat? If we use 2020, which of course we're in the midst of a recession, it's gone up, I think about 27.
Let's not worry about recessions, though. I mean,
no, what I'm trying to say is that obviously if we're talking about, like, typically the way economists will do is try to smooth out like particularly disruptive, sort of like exogenous things that have happened to the economy to get a smoother trend. That's a more reasonable way to make policy. But what I'm trying to say is that even if we used that number, you end up with a 26% increase over the last, 40 or 38 something years, right? But this data doesn't even go all the way back to World War II. Since World War II, we've become a lot wealthier of a society, right?
Yes,
we've become more unequal.
well, okay, yes.
And hold on.
That's
I have
true
one last
for some
point.
people.
I have one last point. It's not true for some people, Andrew. It's the median income.
And how do you come up with a median? How do you come up with a median?
Well, you take the biggest and largest, and then boom,
oh, okay, I see. You take the biggest and the largest, and then you take the lowest, and what? What do you do? Tell me the rest. You're going to take the richest people's amount of money, and that's going to act as an offset to create a median, isn't it? So having just a few billionaires inside of a nation, yeah, it is true.
No,
if you just added
Andrew,
like what, 10 billionaires, suddenly your median income for the whole country could change. Isn't that true?
No, Andrew, that's not true. No. Okay, so I'm not. No. Andrew, you're talking about an average. A median and an average are two different things.
I just went off your definition, but go ahead.
Okay, so you have to. You know what a median is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a median the reason you'd prefer median over average is because medians are not affected by necessarily high levels of inequality, right? Because if you have 100 billionaires making $20 billion a year each, and you've got 100,000 other people who are making shit wages, the average would be skewed by those numbers, but not the median. So that's why I pull median income and not average income, because it would be skewed. Median is not skewed, right? So what we
Okay.
see.
I'm sorry, man. Let me just, before we get into this, because I haven't had time to study this, okay?
No worries.
And I'm not going to pretend that I have. And I will. I always do for everything that everybody says to me and shows me and this kind of thing. But you can essentially say whatever you want within this threshold, and I can't really contest it because I haven't had time to study what you're saying. But what we can agree on, right, and you have already agreed and conceded this point, that maybe you do think that it would be problematic for us to cut taxes for the lower and middle class to incentivize birth rates, including the lower classes to incentivize birth rates. But you do think that it would work to incentivize birth rates. Is that correct?
So when I say I think it would work, what I mean is all else equal, you would probably have a higher birth rate than you otherwise would. That doesn't mean it would fill the gap. So what I was trying to get at, my last point, was that the programs that you describe, increase wealth. Well, we've already got that. A GI Bill that provides affordable homes and affordable education to veterans. We've already had that for the last, I guess, basically since the GI Bill was passed, right? And we've still seen a decrease in birth rate. My point is that your policy prescriptions don't actually work to significantly curb the problem. They'd already be shown to work if that was the case.
They have been shown to work, and I gave you the years that they were shown to work.
But they clearly haven't been shown to work.
And do you want to know why all that changed?
They clearly haven't been shown to work.
Oh, no, they were shown to work. Do you know why all that changed? It was because of one fucking book written by one of you dumbass progressives, and it was called Population Bomb. Have you ever read it?
I think I know what it is, but you can.
What is it?
I believe that there was a scare in, I don't know what year exactly, but there was a movement which was the idea that we're going to become overpopulated and that this was a problem. And so we need to discourage population growth because we're going to run out of food.
Massive global antinatalism based on the fact that they claimed that global population increase was going to lead to mass starvation. Exactly the fucking opposite happened. Now, you'll never guess, but the guy who wrote that book, what do you think he had a degree in?
I don't know, women's studies.
I think it was economics.
You think so?
I think so.
Are you telling me that sometimes economists can be wrong?
No, I'm saying that all the time. They're always wrong, almost all the time.
Well,
I think of economics as a soft science. It's a pseudoscience. I don't consider it a real science. No.
Well, I don't think most economists consider economics a science either, to be fair. But I do think it's a technical study that you can apply quasi-experimental designs to and come to reasonable conclusions over, right?
Yeah, I just wish that they would do that every once in a while because, I mean, so far we can't seem to compensate for inflation. We don't seem to ever know what's coming around the next corner. Markets are continuously fluctuating in ways economists cannot seem to predict. And so, my trust factor for a bunch of people who wrote a massive antinatalist book and then promoted it globally, which put us in the fucking fix we're in, very low, to be perfectly honest with you.
Well, I can't say that I agree. Also, the Paul Enrich guy appears to have had a degree in zoology, so I'm not, at least I'm not able to find.
Well, I don't know. I said I thought it was in economics. I wasn't sure. I thought it was, but it doesn't matter.
Sure? You seemed quite confident.
No, I didn't. I said I think it was in economics. Those were literally my exact words. But I'll look into that too. But Dr. Elric essentially wrecked everything for everybody based on this stupid-ass book, Antinatalism Propaganda, which led to these mass decreases in the birth rate. And again, like I told you before, if you start to get under certain thresholds, it's very difficult to recover. We could have continued the trend from the early 40s to the early 60s and having massive population growth, except for all the antinatalism rhetoric that came around from dumbasses who were saying, hey, everyone's going to starve to death. Exactly the opposite happened. So the thing is again, my trust factor for scientism is very low. Okay, I saw this happen. Okay, tracked it in real time, and you can literally watch that book drop and watch the birth rates drop right along with it. And this was a global phenomenon. The media covered it nonstop, night and fucking day. Okay, and what I'm
Yeah.
saying to you is that we've already seen mass population increase inside of the United States based on social policies that make sense. Right? You've already agreed that that's true. The only problem you seem to have is that you seem to think that what we need to do is continue to import a massive quantity of people from other nations instead of incentivizing our own because you just don't think it'll work.
I think that what you have here is a good story and it's a good narrative, but it flies in the
It's
face of
true.
all of the. Well,
No,
hold on.
it's
Let me let
true.
me let me let me
Go ahead.
finish here.
I'm
So
sorry.
it flies in the face of the fundamental argument you made before, right? Which was the idea that increases in wealth, increases in income, and government programs that allow people to more easily have a family, such as subsidizing home interest rates or educations, would cause people to have a an increase in birth rate. Now, my point is that that hasn't been bore out over time because everything you just described is either still around or it's been getting better. Right now, you go and switch to a narrative about a book, a single book by a man who is a zoologist,
No,
not an
I didn't switch.
economist.
No.
Well, hold on, let me finish here.
Go
So
ahead.
you then talk about, oh well, the reason these programs didn't continue to work and the reason the economy getting better didn't continue to cause birth rates to go up is because this single book caused the whole entire Western world to
No, the whole
stop
world.
having kids.
Whole
Oh,
world.
I apologize. I was giving you some some credit there, but caused the whole entire world to
Yeah,
stop
this isn't
having
disputed,
as many kids.
man. This isn't disputed. Like
You know, I
historians don't dispute this.
so again, I'm not. Well, how do I put this? A lot of things affect a lot of things, right? But it's just a matter of the degree to which and how linked they are, right? And I cannot imagine. And to be fair, you could send me a study that would maybe prove me wrong here. I'd love to see a source. You said it's not disputed, historians, whatever. Send me a historian who talks about it, I guess. I've sent you my sources. But I would imagine that the statement that a single book caused the whole world to stop having as many babies as they used to, and that caused the population decline that has basically been with us for the last 60 years, is probably a fairly disputed statement in the halls of history. That
I
would be
don't
my
think that it
assumption.
is any more than a single man who wrote a book named Karl Marx also led to mass global transformation. You seem to think that nothing ever works within a linear concept, but guess what? Some things do work within a linear concept. Sometimes
Oh, I never said
people,
that.
one man, can do something that resonates and changes the entire landscape of every single nation globally.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's one bullet shot at an archduke that can literally lead the entire world to global warfare. There are
right.
catalyst events for things. And what I'm
I think
telling
the
you is that
difference.
within the confines of this, you will find that the population bomb drops and you start to see massive antinatalist rhetoric that has stuck with us since it dropped. It still hasn't gone away. There's still overpopulation advocates everywhere saying, let's get on with the more abortions. Let's get on with the mass birth rate drops, right? And we see people like you come in and advocate, no, let's just have as much immigration as we possibly can. Why waste any of our time incentivizing our own population? Now you claim that the whole of my argument is, well, all of these programs have massively grown. No, they haven't. That's a fucking lie. That's one.
I said
Two,
that's not true. That's not what I said.
the other problem with it is I told you that there was factory conditions that occurred because of the military industrial complex being in place when it came to the amount of jobs that were available, which created the entire middle class, literally created it overnight. That's where the middle class came from. So the thing is like, look, man, okay, you can be as upset about this as you want, but the truth of the matter is that we can replicate those conditions. Trump already showed us that you can bring manufacturing back, that you can have massive manufacturing growth, which actually you have so much of it that it leads to a labor shortage. Okay, we can begin to replicate those conditions. I'm giving you one example of a way that you could easily do that. And the way that you could easily do that is by incentivizing your domestic population to breed via massive tax breaks to the income tax. And you don't seem to dispute that that will lead to it. You're just saying you don't know how much. Well, I don't know how much either, but I do know for sure that if we continue on these birth rate trends, that immigration is not going to be sustainable long term.
So the number of births in the U.S. declined every year that Donald Trump was in office, right? So again, I think that the narrative that you're saying, it makes sense on paper, but it's not bore out empirically. You mentioned the idea that the middle class was boomed and birthed out of the factory conditions and sort of steel, the sort of industrial conditions of the United States. I'm not arguing against it. I'm explaining your narrative to you so that I don't, respond to an argument you're not making, right? So you claim that the middle class was boomed out of, or at least greatly expanded as a result of these factory conditions in the 1940s. My response would be that the middle class has gotten even richer since then. They've done even better since then, right? The programs that I said didn't necessarily grow, but they're still here. You still get a scholarship for being in the military, going to college. You still get the same sort of loans. If anything, the amount of government subsidized loans has gone up.
But you need to have all of these conditions, not just one of those conditions. That was not even specifically tailored towards some type of pronatalism plan. It just happened to be that when all of those conditions were set, that you ended up with a huge amount of growth in births. I'm just simply stating that we can indicate that there was a time when this happened. So we do know for sure that you can implement pronatalist plans and that those plans can work because we've seen it work as a side effect when we didn't even mean for that to be part of the plan. So
and here's
this is my overarching point to you. I'm not saying we're not going to be able to replicate those conditions completely, lest we have some other global war. We may not be able to, okay? But we can most certainly replicate things like what's going on in Hungary with their child policy. That seems to be having some degree of success. We can point at some other nations like Libya, which completely and totally eradicated their birth rate issues. We can also look at countries like Israel that offer things to the women inside of Israel that are very pro-birth. They're one of the few, or the only, to my knowledge, Western nation, or what you would consider a Western nation, that has increasing birth rates. So no, man, I'm really not sure where our confusion is coming in exactly.
Yeah, sure. So the birth rate in Hungary has declined every year for the past several years, and it's projected to continue to keep declining.
Yes.
So
it's a 20-year investment, man. They just started the program.
Okay, sure. Well, we could say that, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe in the next 20 years, maybe.
But there's indicators that it's working now.
Well,
but Libya, it was eradicated.
Not.
It was eradicated in Libya just by sharing oil dividends.
What was eradicated in Libya? Sorry,
the birth rate crisis. I can send you all kinds of data on that if you'd like.
Well, it looks like here the birth rate in Libya has been declining every single year since the 1970s. So again, I'm not sure that you have. I mean, here's my overarching point to you, and I don't know if we'd want to go to, audience comments or close up or keep going from here. But my overarching point would be that here's what I know, right? I know that the empirics you describe don't say what you say they do, right? The idea that, oh, well, if we have these good government programs that basically incentivize people to have children, by making it more financially advantageous to have children, and we make the economy more robust and more wealthy, people will have children. It's not true. It hasn't been true really over the course of human history. There's countries that are even more generous when it comes to supporting mothers with paid time off, with subsidies for childcare, free prenatal care, stuff like that. Countries in Europe that even have stricter abortion rules than America. America has one of the most liberal abortion states in the entire world. But again, in Europe, you see these same trends, even though they're more generous, right? And even though they've continued to get wealthier over time. Here's what I know works, though, to solve this problem. Immigration. All of the empirics point to that being the case. In America right now, there's 50 million people who are working, living every single day, being productive members of society that weren't born here, right? They make our society better. They contribute to the wealth that actually helps people have children, like you say you want to happen. And so that would be the most sort of overarching point that I can make on the issue.
Okay, and here would be my point on the issue, and I'll close up with this, and
Go
then
for
we
it.
can get to a little bit of Q&A. My overarching point on this issue is that all of those immigrants' children, I want to be raised inside of a nation where they have phenomenal opportunity. And the bestest way that we're going to give them that opportunity, Econoboi, is by making damn sure that they can live that American dream that everybody's so pissed off that they lost. And that's going to include having at least a lower middle class lifestyle. It's going to include having children. It's going to include having good housing. It's going to include having access to drinking water and education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What we see right now is a global downtrend in birth rates worldwide. If that trend continues, we're going to have all kinds of supply chain issues. We're going to have all kinds of problems that you can't even begin to foresee. Okay? We've never had a globalized economy where we have such a decline in birth rates that we can't even keep up with worker production. And you think that this is all going to be okay because even though our neighbors to the south, their birth rate may decline to the point where we can no longer draw immigrants from them, that somehow things are just going to sustain with the status quo and we're going to be able to have endless growth. It's fucking absurd on its face. It's kicking the can down the road. It's putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Far better to utilize the resources that we have in order to promote the domestic birth rate. I could care less about it being just white people or it being Hispanics or it being blacks. I want all Americans to be able to increase the birth rate so that they can live the happiest lives that they possibly can live. So this is my counter argument to this. We've already indicated that there have been birth rate cycles that have drastically increased. We gave the years for which they increased. They have not been contested. His reasons for why don't seem to make any sense. So no, I don't think we got a lot of agreement out of this one.
Certainly not. No, I didn't expect so, but it was I would say, a productive conversation.